Capital punishment has in the past been practiced in virtually every society, although currently only 58 nations actively practice it, with 95 countries abolishing it. It is a matter of active controversy in various countries and states, and positions can vary within a single political ideology or cultural region. Execution of criminals and political opponents has been used by nearly all societies, both to punish crime and suppress political dissent. In most cases that practice capital punishment, it is reserved for murder, espionage, treason, or as part of a military justice. In some countries, sexual crimes such as rape, adultery, incest, and sodomy carry the death penalty. In many countries that use the death penalty, drug trafficking is also a capital offense. In China, human trafficking and serious cases of corruption are punished by the death penalty. In militaries around the world, court-martials have imposed death sentences for offenses such as cowardice, desertion, insubordination, and mutiny. There are 5 forms of capital punishment that are currently practiced: lethal injection, lethal gas, electrocution, hanging, and firing squad. Lethal injection is the world's newest method of execution and is quickly becoming the most common. In 1982, the United States became the first country to use lethal injection as a means of carrying out capital punishment. Lethal injection was originally proposed as a means of execution in 1888 in New York, but the state chose electrocution instead. In 1977, Oklahoma became the first state to adopt lethal injection legislation. 5 years later, Texas performed the first execution by lethal injection. Of the 38 states that have a death penalty, 34 use lethal injection as the primary form of execution. The United States federal government and the United States military also use lethal injection. In 2004, according to the United States Department of Justice, 59 people were executed in the United States, and all but one of those died by lethal injection. With lethal injection, 3 drugs are administered to the prisoner via IV. The first drug renders the offender unconscious in only a few seconds. The second drug paralyzes the respiratory system, including the diaphragm. And the third drug forces the heart to stop beating, causing death. The next form of execution is electrocution. Electrocution was first used in 1890. On February 8, 2008, the Nebraska Supreme Court determined that execution via the electric chair was cruel and unusual punishment under the state's constitution. This brought executions of this type to an end in Nebraska, the only remaining state to retain it as its sole method of execution. During electrocution, the prisoner is strapped to a chair and connected to the electrodes that will deliver the electrical shock. The prisoner is first shocked for 15 seconds with 2,450 volts of electricity. After 15 minutes, an official checks for signs of life. If the prisoner is still alive, he or she will receive a 20-second shock of 2,450 volts of electricity. This process will be repeated until the prisoner is pronounced dead. Now considered cruel and unusual punishment in most states, the electric chair is not used very often. The next form of execution is lethal gas. During the Holocaust, large-scale gas chambers were constructed for mass killings. This gave officials the idea for the gas chamber. During this process, the executioner will place a quantity of potassium cyanide pellets into a compartment directly below the chair in the chamber. The condemned person is then brought into the chamber and strapped into the chair, and the airtight chamber is sealed. At this point, the executioner will pour a quantity of concentrated sulfuric acid down a tube that leads to a small holding tank directly below the compartment containing the cyanide pellets. The executioner will throw a switch to cause the cyanide pellets to drop into the sulfuric acid, initiating a chemical reaction that generates hydrogen cyanide gas. The gas is visible to the condemned, and he or she is advised to take several deep breaths to speed unconsciousness in order to prevent unnecessary suffering. Accordingly, execution by gas chamber is especially unpleasant for the witnesses to the execution due to the physical responses exhibited by the condemned during the process of dying. These responses can be violent and can include convulsions and excessive drooling. It is unknown whether or not the condemned actually experienced pain during this process. The next form of execution is hanging. The two largest mass executions in the United States, of 38 men and 13 men carried out at the same time, were carried out by hanging. Only the states of Washington and New Hampshire still retain hanging as an option. In New Hampshire, if it is found to be impractical to carry out the execution by lethal injection, then the condemned will be hanged, and in Washington, the condemned still has an outright choice between hanging and lethal injection. Hanging is rarely used in the United States today, but does remain an option in a few states. The last form is firing squad. Execution by firing squad is particularly common in military circumstances or in times of war. The firing squad is generally composed of several soldiers or police officers. The method of execution requires all members of the group to fire simultaneously, thus preventing both disruption of the process by a single member and identification of the member who fired the lethal shot. Some official protocols called for inclusion of one or more blank cartridges randomly distributed among the live ammunition, giving each squad member a chance of not having killed. The condemned is typically blindfolded or hooded, as well as restrained, though in some cases, condemned prisoners have asked to be allowed to face the firing squad without their eyes covered. Executions can be carried out with the condemned either standing or sitting. In conclusion, capital punishment continues to be debated every day. Although there are several different means of execution, lethal injection remains the most commonly used and considered the most humane method. Although the process of execution is planned and executed perfectly, there is always room for error. There are many instances of botched executions, although the majority are carried out without error.